And so we're going to be talking about the psychology of swindles today. And first of all, what is a swindle? Who can tell me what that means? I know some of you guys know, but maybe not everybody here.
Yeah, I mean, in chess terms, it's probably winning a game that you really should not win.
Exactly. So we're talking about swindling. We're talking about you're coming from behind. The other guy is really dictating the action. They've taken over. Maybe you're down a piece, whatever it is. But what's the mindset we need if we want to keep playing? Or how long should we keep playing? When should we resign? When should we throw in the towel? Things like that.
Never. Never resign.
Never resign?
Never.
Play to the bitter checkmate end. Well, I've got a couple rules that I like to use for when to resign. And we'll talk about some of those. And really, never is kind of the mindset that I like to take. But basically, it's about when you can find something or not, right? So the mindset I like to take, and when you're talking about swindles, is looking for the next idea. Anytime you've still got another idea that you say, hey, maybe this is going to get me back into the game, maybe this is going to give me a chance, keep playing, see if that idea will work out. When you're out of ideas and all you can see are ways for your opponent to beat you, and you have nothing left that you can see to remotely stop it, that's probably a good time to resign. But until then, as long as you keep seeing ways to fight on, then we're going to keep looking for them. So here's a game I played on chess.com. This game comes out of a blitz game, and we're going to see a lot of blunders from me today. So we're going to start off. The first 4 games are all games where I blundered pretty poorly, and we're going to see how I'm trying to keep some ideas alive. The last game that we'll go to is going to be a Grandmaster game. We'll finish off looking at a game between Shirov and Kramnik from the Linares tournament in '94. So we'll talk a little bit about that one. So blunders happen at all levels, and swindles happen at all levels as well. And we'll kind of get to see that today as we go through. So first of all, I've got the black pieces in this one, and my last move I played bishop to d5. And tactical moment here, what's wrong with the move bishop to d5 here?
The pawn on e6 is pinned. What are you doing?
What am I doing, right? This pawn is pinned here on e6.
What are you doing?
So, of course, my opponent plays the move bishop takes d5. And now comes an important moment, because there's really 2 ideas here for black. First of all, from a purely material standpoint, what's the best move for black here? Yeah.
Rook c2 check, probably rook 6b2.
Is that the best from a material standpoint?
I don't see much better.
Do you have any other idea?
See E5.
E5. Is there any way black can win this bishop back? Don't.
Rook D8.
Rook d8. So rook d8, yeah, my bishop was pinned, but now your bishop's pinned too. Of course, if you defend it again with the rook, now there's not a pin on my e-pawn, so I can take twice, right? I can take and recapture.
Are you still losing because the outside passer? Or?
Now, that's the problem, is if we play rook d8, what can happen is white can just give the bishop back. He can play rook takes b4, and after a move like rook takes bishop, this is a miserable ending for black. I mean, you're just down 2 outside pass pawns. You have no compensation. There's not really any fun. So objectively speaking, and from computer evaluation standpoint, this is the best continuation for black. One of the things when we're talking about swindling is we want to make sure we're not thinking like computers. We want to make sure we're thinking practical, giving ourselves chances, right? We want to think, how can we actually pose problems for the opponent? This game, especially against a class B and higher player, I expect most people to be able to win as white. You've got 2 outside pass pawns. Black's going to be suffering. The best black could possibly hope for in this game would be a draw, and it's going to be a miserable one to try to play on for. So, rather than playing rook d8 here, I went with Luke's suggestion and the idea of rook to c2. So rook to c2 check, of course, we're looking to get back the pawn on the b2 square. But more importantly, what ideas, if we're dreaming up ways to come back in this game, ways to draw, what would be your dream to try to get back into this game for the black pieces? Yeah.
It's just
something like doubling rooks on the second rank and just check qualities because the king's kind of trapped.
Exactly. So one thing that you can always look for, are different drawing possibilities, different perpetuals, things like that, right? So if you've got a queen on the board looking for those open lines, ways to cause perpetuals that way, or with the rooks trying to get them doubled on the 7th, and that's really what I'm starting to play for here. So my whole idea is, I'm going to get this pawn back, and I'm going to try to stop him from getting an outside passer because that's going to be his quickest way to win. And I'm going to hope that I can get the rooks doubled up on the second file. Yeah.
Isn't that active counterplay?
Yeah, exactly. The idea of active counterplay, right? So if we played that rook d8, it's true we'll get the bishop back, but we're not going to have any active ideas after that. We're just going to be stuck passively defending.
Could you give me a short overview of what's going on?
So we're talking about swindles today. We're talking about games where things aren't looking good for you, and you're trying to come up with a way to get back into the game. So right now, Black just lost a bishop, we're down a piece, and we're trying to find some way to dream up hopes of coming back in this game.
Okay.
So my opponent played king g1, which is not really ideal and starts to give me a little bit more glimmer of hope. A lot of the opponent's moves in these games aren't going to be the best because, well, if you're going to pull off a swindle, your opponent can't make the best moves, right? That's just the reality of it. Yes?
Can't White just play rook c1, force the trade of rooks? Force the rooks to come off the board?
Why do you want to force the rooks off the board? You're down a bishop.
Like, we can take that rook out, move that rook out, so then we can take back that bishop. But then he'll play a rook.
So if you play rook c1 right here, White can just play his other rook back, I believe. Well, then you could take and take.
Actually, I
you
think
can
we
play rook
could
to
trade.
e4.
So rook to c1,
Rook to e4.
and yeah, rook e4 looks good.
Yes.
Keeping
You could even trade because there's
Yeah.
no perpetual here, although he does grab him, so maybe not.
I think you get the bishop back if you trade because you're taking the check. So the point is if you take
Oh,
here, then
okay.
you're recapturing.
Then you have a pawn.
Yeah,
Then you
White
get the
still-
pawn.
So it's not as bad. Yeah, you'll get the pawn back. So White can't trade rooks here, but rook e4 will hold in this position because you're going to keep that. This is part of why king g1 wasn't a very good move from him because it starts to make things a little hairier back there. Like if he plays king f1, then he doesn't have to worry about those ideas. But whatever, okay, king g1 was played. So I went ahead and took the pawn back. Going with that plan of like we said, if we can get those rooks doubled down on that file, we're going to be able to cause that perpetual. And of course also we're getting rid of one of those passed pawns. We can get rid of both of these queenside pawns. It's going to still be more difficult for White to win, right? I mean, if we can trade these guys off, even down a bishop, White's going to have to work to be able to break through this 3-on-4 over here and be able to win just up a piece there. Even the endgame of bishop versus rook, it's a very difficult one to win. Depending on the setup, it can be drawn or it can be winning depending where the pieces end up in the end. Not the easiest to play. Rather have the bishop than not, but you have hope. So White played bishop b3, moving the bishop away, of course, and also, stopping me from getting into the c2 square. So going along with what we talked about already, we'd love to double rooks down there. Do we have any way to come up with a plan to try to do that? What can we really try to do at this point to see, is there any way to get ourselves back up in here? How can we keep doing something active at this point? Yeah.
Rook c3.
Yeah, rook c3. And the whole point of rook c3 is just to pose a question to White. What are you going to do about this pawn over here? Now if you take my b pawn, I'm going to take your f pawn, and it's true you'll have an outside passer here, but I've got a protected passer here, and at least I have some compensation, right?
Then you can still double up on the second rank.
And
There's
you
still
can't-
dreams of
and you
doubling on
can't
the
move
second
a
rank.
pawn either, unless you can move this bishop.
Yeah, the a pawn, there's lots of problems here, and you're active, you're coming up with good active ideas, so White probably should not take this pawn right now. That's not the ideal move for White to play. Of course, things still aren't great, we're still down a piece, but in a lot of positions, we make these blunders, we make these mistakes. Almost every time you hang a piece in chess or give up a piece or blunder or do something, there's always going to be some degree of compensation. It usually doesn't justify your mistake. It usually doesn't justify the piece that you've lost. But a lot of times, just the fact that somebody took your piece means they had to move another piece to a weird square, right? They had to take their piece and put it somewhere that it doesn't really belong most of the time. So you're gonna get something out of that. And really the whole idea behind the swindle is trying to eke every last bit of that you can. Going, okay, well, I gave something up, but how can I make your position more awkward every little bit and keep posing problems? Yes?
So like, how far is it to like, you can't make a comeback, you should just resign? Like how far into?
So when you should resign, the way that I like to look at it, and this is what I was mentioning before, is if I'm gonna resign, I'm gonna run out of all of my ideas. If I still see an active idea that looks like, hey, this is gonna pose a problem for my opponent, this is gonna make him think about something, he can go wrong. If your opponent still has the chance to go wrong, where it's not clear that what he should do to win, then keep playing. You know, at this point, it's not totally clear. It's, of course, black is losing, but it's not so clear how to make that happen yet, and black has active ideas. So keep playing on a little bit, and if white shows that you have nothing left to go for, then okay, you go on the
Yeah,
television.
because I played a game Tuesday night yesterday, and I lost in 8. I lost my queen in 8 moves of this opening trap, so I just resigned there. So.
Well, it's always up to you. I mean, part of it has to do with what we're talking about today too, that psychology, right? That thinking process. As soon as you think you're beat in chess, you're beat.
Yeah.
I mean, even grandmasters, there's a few examples of games, I didn't find one today, but there are a couple games that grandmasters have resigned and drawn or winning positions. It's not unheard of that that's happened before because they've been losing, they've been demoralized psychologically for 6 hours, they're exhausted, they've been playing at a chessboard, and suddenly something happens that changes the nature of the position, there's a chance to draw, and they're just too tired to find it, they just don't see what it is. And they feel lost because they've been losing for so long. So part of the psychology is keeping that sort of positive mindset, making your opponent prove their idea every time. Every time they have an idea, say, okay, prove it. Make sure that you can actually follow through and try to pose problems along the way for them to solve. So here, white makes another mistake, and this is really where things start to slip back toward black having some real chances. If you're white, how should you defend this f-pawn?
Very carefully.
Brooks.
Bishop to g1. That way you cannot double.
So bishop b1 would be one idea, preventing the double.
Lose the a-pawn though.
What's that?
Do you lose the a-pawn if you move bishop?
Well, then rook takes, well, yeah, rook takes,
Bishop d1, you're going to lose the a-pawn.
rook
So
takes before then.
So maybe.
that's okay. I'm probably okay trading those 2 pawns. I just don't want you to have this outside passer.
Yeah, this is my draw.
Gets a little bit closer to a draw. Black would be happy to trade some pawns. What would you do, Ryan?
Maybe, I might, like, go rook e d1 and maybe go for some activity on the d file.
So if you play rook e to d1, then I can take your pawn.
Yeah, but I was thinking maybe we could get some rooks on the 7th as well.
Yeah, but then do
It's
want
going to be
to-
too slow because I'm going to get to your 7th faster, right? I'm 1 move away. You can check, then I'm just going to run over this way, and it's going to take you
Oh.
multiple moves to pull both of your rooks down. Yes.
Just a simple rook f1.
Rook f1. And the point is, yes, black can threaten to come in, so if we play rook e3 here,
Not rook
then
f2.
white can play rook f2 and stop that from happening. So we're not going to get the doubling occur because he can at least contest the 2nd rank. However, white doesn't play this. He goes the other way with the rook to f4. And why is this a mistake now? Yeah.
He let you in.
He let me in, right? So now rook d3, and now white really can't stop us from being able to achieve those rooks on 2nd. So it's going to be much more difficult to defend this position for the white pieces at this point in time. I'm not sure if it's quite even just yet or not. I think, yeah, there's still defense at this point. Bishop c4 is the idea. You want to reroute the bishop back to f1 in order to be able to hold the g2 square and stop perpetuals. That's what white needs to do here. Basically, this is white's last chance to find that drawing idea, though. So we can get those rooks down to the second. We're going to be able to create that perpetual. Done.
Could you also defend by moving rook d1 in this position?
Rook d1? Like this?
Yes.
I guess now rook to e3.
Let's
And
see.
then rook e4.
Wait, no, why can't
Right,
white
we
just
said
take
it
the
was
bishop
pawn.
like
Never mind.
rook b takes b3?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's it. Never mind.
Because now the rook's hanging if you take here, and if you take there, I get the bishop back. Yep, so tactical problems with that one.
Wow.
So yeah, really what white needs to do is that idea of bishop c4, because now if you come here after bishop f1, you're at least defending g2, so it stops all the perp ideas. Of course, black does get this pawn off. It's still going to be a long struggle, but you get rid of those perpetual check ideas. Again, white didn't find that idea. That one is not the easiest idea to find. White played king f1, and of course now we've got that draw in the bag. Same reasons that we talked about before. Now our rooks are on the second. We're going to be able to at least get perpetual. There's no way to stop it at this point. And of course in this game, our opponent actually made a further blunder and decided to lose as well. Yes.
He lost?
Yeah, so he played his rook over, and after check, we both had 5 seconds on the clock at this point. And after, I'm just going to keep checking you, H2
Yeah.
and G2.
Oh
Did
no,
he come
played
to-
king
And he played
f1.
king f1.
Oh no!
You take it if you can get it. Yes.
What was the time control?
This was a blitz game. It was maybe 5 minutes, or it might have been 2-1, something like that.
That's what you
I don't remember if there was a 1 second increment or if it was just 5 with no increment. But
There's the make for life.
based on what my rating is, probably 2-1.
I don't think so there is.
But
Wait,
anyway, so of course this isn't necessarily a classical game. This is a quicker one, but the same concepts apply. Some of the other games we talked about are going to be more classical. In a classical game, you're probably not going to get a mate out of this position. You're probably going to see that. But still getting a draw is a swindle, right? It's still coming back from that loss. Yeah.
So that kind of goes with what I was about to ask with so this is a blitz game, so obviously you can sort of maybe afford to play more like this, where you don't go in the engine, what the engine said was best. So in a classical game, how would you decide whether or not to, either win that bishop back like the first continuation we saw, or, go for more with less, material?
Yeah, so I mean,
How do you
basically the way
decide?
that I make that sort of decision is when you're sitting there, how much effort do you think it's going to take you to calculate what's harder for the other person to defend, right? When you're making that practical decision. So for example, when we go back to that early spot where we were, and I played rook c2 instead of rook d8, I was able to look at this and say, if I go here and we make that trade, or he takes here and I get the bishop back, in my opinion, I look at that position and I go, I would just be happy with white. I'm going to feel like it's an easy win. It's going to be slow, but it's going to be an easy win. I probably just put this other rook behind the pawn and start pushing it.
Yeah.
Tie you down and have an easy day. So rook c2 to me already, from a practical standpoint, even though it's a blitz game, it already seems like it's going to pose more problems. Because of course a bishop alone isn't enough to win the game. I mean, if you can magically trade off all the pawns and the rooks, it's going to be a draw.
Wait, what? Oh, all the pawns are down.
Yeah. Now that takes a lot of magic. It's not going to happen
Or it takes a
overnight.
lot of board slamming.
But that at least gives you something to aim for. It gives you a long-term plan. The idea of getting the bishop back, but the other guy gets the 2 pawns, you don't have any of those active ideas. So you always want to keep some sort of active idea if you have the option to.
Or just to continue on what you were saying.
This one will look familiar to somebody.
not
Speaking of the more classical time.
No, not this game.
Who?
I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it.
Wow, versus Nick Pearson.
But we're at a point in the game.
No, you didn't ask me. You didn't tell me. I brought it out. I played.
I was turned over 4. What happened to get to this position?
There was a sequence of trades with the bishops on the diagonal, and I completely overlooked this fork. So I just overlooked this tactical idea. He played bishop here, and I doubled rooks, and after the trade, then went e4. And this is a big moment when you're at a chess board.
Get some of them.
I mean, at this point, I'm losing an exchange. This was a month or a month and a half ago. I don't know how long. A couple months ago. It's been a while. But when this sort of thing happens to you at the chessboard, it's a pretty big psychological blow, right? You're sitting there, you've overlooked something, you didn't even think about it, your opponent makes a move, and you just have that yikes moment. Like, I didn't even consider this, I didn't think about this. The first time I played Luke, he beat me in the same opening when I had the white pieces. And so I was, ready for this opening, felt like I had prepared it better, and then I just blundered again and was losing again. So at this point I was feeling pretty bad about myself, right? Feeling, this is not good. I've already lost once to this guy, and I just am giving him another exchange now. So when we're in that position, it's a really big personal challenge, because you've got a lot of negative thoughts going through your own head, right? You're not thinking very happily after something like this happens, this move happens. But of course we have to come back to reality. We have to come back to the moment, we have to come back, see what's going on, and figure out if we have good active plans, if we have a way to keep playing, if we have something else to look for. We're going to be losing the exchange here. There's no way around that. We're going to have to move our queen, and the knight's going to be able to take our rook. The question is, after this, do we have any way to start creating counterplay? Do we have any ideas? So looking at the structure, looking at spots in this position, what sort of ideas do we have for white? Or is this just one of those where we just blundered a piece and the other guy gets to have all the fun and we should just resign? Yeah.
Actually, I'm thinking after queen b3 and knight takes d2, oh wait, that doesn't work, never mind. I was thinking instead of taking back the knight, we could check with the knight, but then he just takes the queen.
Yeah, it would be nice to set up a discovery here, and queen b3 is what I played. And if you could magically play like knight to e7 double check, that would be fun.
No, you
But
can't.
this knight is not going to magically go to e7 or f6. So you can't quite make something like that work.
Or your knight's not a bishop. Your knight's not a bishop and a knight at the same time. Your knight's not a magical double minor.
If only it could be, yeah. So we're in a little bit of trouble. Yes?
No, no.
I think queen d3.
So why do you want to put the queen on d3?
Oh wait. Oh. Because you can put the queen up to d6. And attack the queen and the rook, but the rook is yeah.
Yeah, we want to keep as many pieces on the board as possible for sure. I mean, we're about to lose material. So the more pieces we trade off, the less counterplay we're going to be able to generate, right? One of those rules of thumb, if we can help it, is when we're down material, we want to avoid trades. Yeah, Austin.
I was just looking at, after queen b3, would you advise for or against with black a move like a4 to kind of
a4.
with like thoughts of getting b5 in after you trade the exchange?
I think you can get away with a4 here. It's also the best move after the knight capture. We'll talk about that in a couple moves here. I think it can work in either position. You can get it in now if you want, or you can wait till after the trade. Because I don't see any downside to playing a4 right now. But they're still going to be able to take the rook next move. White has to do something about that. So a4 is a nice idea here. And queen b3 is maybe slightly inaccurate because of the a4 ideas. That actually is the best way for black to totally shut down white's counterplay. So the idea behind queen b3, it's less about this discover check. I mean, of course it sets up a discover check. It'd be nice to dream of that if black magically allows me to do something with that. But that's kind of a one-move threat. Creating one-move threats usually doesn't work in chess. Opponents are gonna see one move threats. But it's more about a longer term idea here. What are some weak squares in black structure right now?
E6.
So e6, and basically everything behind this f pawn, right? I mean, e6, e5, f7, all of this area here is weak because that f pawn's come forward, right? So these are all squares that I can try to fight to take control of that are advanced in the enemy camp. So maybe even though I give up the exchange, I've got some chance to fight for some of that stuff. So after knight takes d2, rook takes d2, down the exchange, not happy, black is better. And here is actually, also like you mentioned before, Austin, a4 is the best move here as well. Just gets the queen off of the diagonal and keeps the king on a better square. So what happened in the game was king h8. And it's not that this move is losing or giving up the advantage, but it's slightly weakening. And the reason it's slightly weakening is your king's in the corner now, and there's maybe eventually going to be back rank ideas. Longer term, it's not the ideal place for the king. Whereas after a4, the queen comes off the diagonal, and the king's going to be happy on the g8 square. You don't have to worry about it over there. Yes?
You can, after king h8, you can, OP plays rook a6 and then play knight f7 check.
Yeah, so I mean, this is kind of what we're trying to set up, is we're trying to set up some ideas of getting this knight to f7 here. We mentioned about these squares being weak, so even though we're down the exchange, this is where we're starting to come up with plans to solidify and get there. There's really two ways to try to do this. What would you guys suggest here for white? How are we going to try to get active and get into the game? Yeah.
So one idea I see is playing knight e5 and then something like rook d7. If you try to first play like rook a d8, then you can take and he can capture the board. So
Yeah, knight e5, can he not play queen takes knight?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably better.
Yeah, I wish you played that one game.
I don't know.
But I do like the way you're thinking about things. Dom,
Can you try to
I think I
prepare
was
knight
I would have really happy.
you can prepare knight e5. Yeah. So this is what actually happened in the game. I wanted to play knight e5, like Brooks is saying, so I played f4. So I prepared it, right? Played f4, and the point is now that this pawn's come forward, this e5 square is going to be a permanent outpost for the knight. If he ever wants to take the knight, he's going to have to give the rook back in order to get it. There's no more minor pieces that can attack that e5 square. So we're creating that permanent fixed outpost. The computer actually likes knight d6 a little bit better. It's a little bit faster than f4, and of course it doesn't weaken white structure as much. But the flip side of it is now your rook is tied to the knight, and I don't really like it from a practical position, and I think it looks a little awkward. Whereas f4 makes that permanent outpost. I really like that sort of straightforward, logical plan.
It's a more human move.
Yeah, more human, saying I'm going to make the fixed outpost, I'm going to put my knight there. Playing the move knight d6 is the computer recommendation, but it's kind of hairy. I mean, rooks are going to double here, there's going to be pressure, and I've got to worry about tactics just like he does. It's going to be interesting.
The b7 pawn is also double attacked with knight.
Yeah, but after
Yeah.
rook e8, the knight is pinned.
Yeah. I think the point
Yeah, but
here
if
is
queen captures-
you might still be able to get away with this
But then he just
because of the taking
Yeah.
ideas,
Yeah.
since you have check.
Because with check, if they take
Actually, yeah.
Queen.
So like if rook takes, you can play rook takes, rook check, and then queen
Yeah.
takes rook.
And then it goes into you exchange queens after that with queen.
Or you could do queen takes. Well,
If you
queen
play
takes-
queen
queen
takes,
takes, queen
then
takes.
queen takes queen.
And then back queen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so-
inevitable. Then it's a
So
draw.
black doesn't have a great way to deal with this move here without giving the piece back. That's why the computer likes knight d6. But human, it is a little looser, right? It doesn't look as firm. It doesn't look as secure. It is quicker, so it probably is the more accurate move. I won't argue with the computer there, but it's hard to see that. So f4, more human, going for the same ideas, but securing the square. Rook a came to d8, and we went ahead and traded rooks. Now I know I had said before that we don't want to trade off pieces when we're down material, but sometimes it's going to be forced here, right? I mean, if we look at this position, is there any good way to avoid trading off the rooks here for the white pieces?
I don't think so.
No, I mean, the only other moves you can play would be rook e2 or rook c2, and that kind of goes against everything we've been talking about, right? That's not an active idea, that's a passive idea. And when we trade off pieces, we at least keep the tempo. So by trading, it's at least our move again. We get to keep moving forward. Where if we make a passive move to keep the rooks on the board, now it's black's turn again, and they get to keep going through their ideas. So trades in 95, continuing with the idea that we said before. And now we can kind of see why the computer's idea was a little bit better, because with the knight d6, there is that extra set of rooks on the board. But same sort of stuff that we're playing for here. Once again, when we're thinking about these swindles, we're just coming up with ideas, coming up with ways to let the opponent go wrong here. So this is a big moment in the game here. Make sure that you guys think about this one for a moment. If you're the black pieces, how can you play for the win in this position?
Now I feel like I see him looking back.
It's not the easiest to see. I think Luke played the most logical, straightforward move, which
I missed your next move.
which goes back to even. Yeah. Luke's next move allows the evaluation to go back to a draw. But it's the move I think a lot of people would play. Yes.
So is it like some kind of trying to go for a smother?
How's
No,
it gonna
it's
happen?
winning idea
No,
for
it's
black.
black's move.
Well, it's black's move.
I
How
know.
can
If
black
the queen
keep the
wasn't
winning
there,
advantage?
Like, black has to move the roll.
That's
Yes,
what
if it's
it
white
is.
to move right now, that would be our
Yeah,
dream. We would love that.
That would be
We would love that if it's white.
No.
Seeing it from your perspective,
Not
I
quite,
think
because-
what black wants to do
If
is
checking
block
queen
white's
is
queen from that weak
The
diagonal
queen
rook
turns
e5.
f7.
Oh, but you still,
Yeah.
still win
Oh,
the
yeah.
rook.
So, first we have to understand white's drawing idea here. First we need to understand what happened in the game, why it's a draw, and then we can look at this and see what black should do in order to stop it from happening. So what happened in the game was rook to f8, controlling the f8 square a second time, stopping me from those smothered mate ideas,
Or
right?
the fourth idea.
How does white force a draw here?
Wait, did you draw this game?
No, but, well,
Did you lose?
other things happen.
You lost again.
I remember this one because I didn't see it, and then when you played it, I was like, ooh, that's good.
Yeah, this is the move that, after rook f8, the computer evaluation is even as well. So at this point, there was no more winning chances for black after this.
Queen a3 maybe? That's just me doing my
Queen to a3?
It's just me doing my
Just with the rook.
I think it attacks the rook, but I
Praying
think
for rook
you need to
e8.
defend it
Queen e6.
and bring the queen over.
Like for rook d8. Well, if he does rook d8, what am I gonna do? Knight f7 and let him take my knight. So rook d8 isn't even a bad move at all.
So any other ideas?
I think like
Queen-
activating
queen
the queen a
e6.
little, getting it to e6.
Queen
It
e6.
says
It
on
all
the
revolves
invitation.
around like. knight-
Well, it shows what happens in the game. That doesn't mean they're the right answers to my questions, because I don't have the sidelines put in there. That's just what happens in the game. That's not always right. So queen e6, the point is, it's kind of a zugzwang. Black doesn't have good moves with his pieces. I mean, of course, there's still pawn moves and things that can be made,
A4.
but if the rook ever leaves the 7th, or the f file, then of course knight f7.
Knight f7 is a
If the
real
queen ever
bad
leaves the
threat.
7th, then there's knight f7. So the queen is tied down.
So is the rook.
So is the rook. The king can't move. If you push the h-pawn, then I get the other check, and I get to win your rook. So you can't push the h-pawn. If you push the g-pawn, I think maybe you can, but it doesn't improve anything. It's not going to help. It just weakens your pawn structure a little bit. Yes?
Is the rook really tied down to the f file? Because
It's tied down to
if you move the rook, what is the threat?
Well, you can
Okay, so let's say rook to d8.
Rook
to
to
d8.
Uh-oh.
If you move
Maybe
the
this
rook,
is
Yeah,
something
yeah,
that's
yeah.
else.
Knight
Where else would you move the rook?
Rook to
I don't
d8.
know.
Like a8?
Something like that.
Okay, so what does white play?
Not pretty.
I don't know.
Yes, no,
That's
I'm
what
pretty
we're
sure
asking.
that's
No.
Notice that the king is over.
Knight f7.
And-
Remember, it's drawn on.
And then they end up winning the rook.
Wait,
No,
It's
wait,
another
double
mate.
check.
Just you double check.
Well, it's another mate, but,
No,
I mean,
you
here you're
double
gonna be
check.
losing the rook.
Yeah.
Then wait, does it?
But the point is you have at least perpetual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I would
But
say.
then what if you play king f8?
No, you
But
play-
then queen g8
they
now.
played knight e.
And that's
knight e8.
winning. The
No,
rook.
you.
No.
Here you play
Oh,
knight
gotcha.
h7.
Oh,
Put it
yeah.
back to E5.
You do.
No, knight
No.
e6.
Just do knight h6 because of the.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
knight
yeah,
c8,
yeah.
king f8.
Yeah.
But I think knight
You just go
e5
for
works
the
too,
protect.
because the point is if king f8, you've got this.
Okay.
Wow.
And
And
then.
is that
That's-
Oh,
That's why
Yeah.
we go
Yeah.
back to the corner.
Yeah. Then you gotta give the queen up.
So they just come. They just. So after knight to e5, did they just go back
Yeah, back to the
to
corner.
h8 and you just have perpetual?
So which position are we looking at here?
So when we play
Knight
knight
f7, king
f7,
g8, knight e5, king h8.
And we go back.
yeah, is it just for bet?
It goes back to king h8, then we just do knight f7 again.
Yeah, okay.
We're happy to draw with white. We're down in exchange.
Yeah, we're happy to draw,
I'm
right?
also
Yeah.
happy with that win, but
Yeah.
I'm happy with a win.
I mean, if you can find a way to win, by all means, that's even better.
Sapphire and Alex.
That's way better.
And then Drew Dowling.
But
Yeah,
I think black would still like to win here too. I mean, you know, if black can, black still wants to win
Yeah.
here, you
That's
know?
very hard.
I'm still playing for the win, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, you're up in exchange and white's threats are all covered. White doesn't have any, like, immediate breakthrough threat. There's just nothing black can do without allowing threats, is the point, right?
Do the queen side majority. Try to push.
So c5 was played in the game trying to start activating the pawns. Which, you know, I do have to do something about. I mean, if black can push all these pawns up the board and make the queen, like, that would be bad for me.
Wait till, wait.
Well, if I play my b pawn, I lose my c pawn.
Yeah, you can't play the b pawn first. Yeah, because then you could lose the c pawn.
So I gotta put C's in B.
But once again, white has to find some way of forcing the issue a little more. We've got to stay active. Got to come up with something else to try to make a chink in the armor. So our knight is pretty ideal. Our queen is pretty ideal. What other ideas do we have?
What about
No, not
97?
Nigel Shorter.
97. I mean, it's gonna attack the rook,
What about queen
but
c8?
after the rook moves, we probably just have to move the knight back. We're not really making any progress. And now if black wants, maybe he can throw a check in.
Yeah, but he's come.
Yes, he has to come back to F7.
Well, he still has to defend, but we're not really coming up with any active idea there. Do we have any other active ideas? Yeah.
Maybe e4, trying to get some
E4
pawns.
is a little too weakening. I mean, this is gonna
H4?
open things up for black.
Maybe h4 or something.
This gives us the pawn.
No, I remember.
Yeah.
Oh.
You're gonna bring in the, well, I mean, queenside pawns are doing nothing, e4 is weakening. Your queen and knight are in battle, so what's the last thing to push? Put an H.
Yeah. Alpha zero pawn now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's coming in.
Hey, A stands for A.
Kingside is where all the action here is happening. So the idea is we're gonna throw one more little problem in there, right? Thinking about that swindle, we're losing, we are down in material. You have to pose problems to your opponent. Because if you don't come up with something that causes them to think, if you don't pose something that at least makes them stop and come up with a problem, eventually they're just gonna beat you.
Yeah.
You know, if you never ask your opponent the question, what are you gonna do about this? Then they don't have to answer that question, and they're just gonna do their own stuff. Yeah.
So is the idea like behind this h4 push, like once black has to move one of those pawns, like then you can play something like knight d7 to move the rook and enables the check?
Yeah, so the idea is we're just gonna loosen up the pawns one way or the other. I mean, if I play h5 and you play h6, then of course
Then, yeah.
g6 becomes a whole. And if my h pawn comes all the way up to h6 and you play g6, now this square becomes a little loose and there are some dreams of some, you know, Queen G7 mating ideas.
Yeah, I think knight d7.
It's not possible right away, but there's other, you know, things floating in the position. Maybe even knight sacks on G6 at some point become possible, depending on if there's movement of other pieces. You can sack a knight for the pawn, maybe even sack the queen if, you know, like the queen comes to a square where it can be forked, things like that, where you can play queen takes and then knight takes with the fork and take the other queen back.
In that situation, I'm just wondering if it works or not. Like if G6 were to be played, like the reason I'm thinking of knight D7 is because it kind of like it one attacks the rook and two disconnects like the black queen, and like once the rook is attacked, it's like where can it go that it's guarding against queen F? Or
You mean instead of H4, or you mean after?
So after you get the pawn all the way down to like H6, G6 is played, and then.
So like let's imagine that A4 was played, and you're saying like H6, G6.
And then like knight D7.
Yeah, because now the knight's cutting off that interference, so if the
Yeah.
rook leaves the 8th, there's ideas of the queen coming in.
Mhm.
So you probably have to put the rook over here, but then you're just getting mated on
That's
F6.
Yeah.
So
Oh, no.
this is the sort of thing that white really wants.
Mhm.
This is the idea. Get that pawn all the way up the board
Yeah.
and create those mating threats.
They
So knight d7 is going to be the finishing blow, but you got to get that h-pawn in there first,
Mhm.
because it's not going to do anything until you've got that one little extra weakness created. So we did get this position. We got h5. Black did not play a4. Here black threw in a check, queen to b7, and I moved king to h2, and then c4 and h6. So we're starting to get toward that position that you mentioned before. And here is a pretty critical move for black. What is the best way to defend here? Should you play g6?
I think you should just
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
probably just not move anything over
It's
there.
pretty good.
Well, not moving anything has some of the same problems, because knight
Yeah.
d7 and this is still weak, right?
Ah,
I remember being really scared to play this move.
It's just a scary looking move, but I think it's the only move. I mean, let's see if the computer agrees, but I think it's the only defensive move.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I guess it does say you can get
What's
away
this,
with
queen
other stuff.
c8?
I'm sure there's
Yeah.
other moves.
Oh, I
Queen
wasn't
C8.
thinking queen c8.
Queen C8 is go into the bathroom and start
I'm not thinking
crying.
queen c8 would be
Queen
allowed.
C8 is go to the bathroom and start
Oh.
crying.
But g takes h6.
No, it's go to the woman's bathroom
All right,
and
guys.
start crying.
This is one of those moves that you really don't like to play, right? You're taking with the pawn in front of your king, you're loosening things up. But the point is really simple. This h6 pawn is too strong to leave on the board. If you let that white pawn sit on h6, there's too many threats. Now that it's not there, the king has escape squares, queens can come over in some lines. So things have loosened up. White has accomplished loosening up the position, but there's no decisive breakthrough here. So knight d7 is what came now. And once again, we're just trying to ask black, are you going to make a mistake? Right? We're just coming up with ways to try to get into this position. Another thing to remember, if you have knights and queens, they work really, really well against kings. Knights and queens work very well together.
Yeah, because the knight does
What the queen doesn't.
Queen can't.
Yeah. So if you have those two pieces, a lot of times you have good compensation if you can get an attack going. Rook g8 is the right defensive move here. And after queen to e5, basically we're getting close to perpetual territory. We're just going to keep trying to set little traps if we can. Rook g7 is forced. Yes.
I'll tell you what, actually I'll tell when we get to the move where I blunder.
Okay.
I have a story about that one, because I was thinking about the right move.
And so now we set kind of one last trap. I mean, at this point, if we're white, we have the draw secure.
Yes, it's a perpetual check.
Because if we want, we can play queen e8,
Yeah.
queen e5, bop, 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 bop. We've got the draw. So the only other question is if there's any idea to, once again, ask our opponent one more time, are you going to make a mistake, right?
Yeah.
See, one more time, are you going to make a mistake? But of course, we don't want to do that and give away the draw. Because at this point, we have a draw, so we can't ask that question but go back to being lost. We don't want to do that. So, are there any moves for white that will pose
Would
that question?
Danielle Kitterman please come to the Ask Here desk? Danielle Kitterman, thank you.
We captured F5.
I know the whole thing.
If you play queen takes f5, I think you can just play queen takes 9.
Yeah, but then queen f8 check.
Then rook to
Yeah.
g8.
Then
That's
queen
what I
f6.
was looking at.
Then queen to g7.
No, squeeze the team. Someone's like a head in the head.
And black is out.
What about knight f6?
Well, being in the room.
Knight f6.
Nine and
Yeah.
six.
Because what if black doesn't do anything about the back right, like the back right?
Yeah, I see queen e8 here. I see queen e8 here.
Queen e8.
So of course your threat is queen to e8. You want to threaten the back rank.
Oh no.
And now I realize I'm going to lose as rook. I
Yes.
think more than likely I'm going to lose as rook.
Because the other idea behind knight f6 is I can bring it to either e8 or h5, and I can at least exchange everything on g7.
And you know-
And I'm not going to be down the exchange anymore. Yes.
And here there are two moves in my head. I will spoil it. Queen e7 and queen f7. I was thinking for about a solid 2 minutes. I'm gonna play queen f7. I'm gonna go for like h4. I'm gonna try to perpetual. I'm gonna get out of this because I'm down on time at this point. I'm like, man, I drove an hour here. I don't want to play for a draw, and I played queen e7, which blunders. Yeah,
Just
queen
queen
e7 is
e8.
terrible.
Does queen f7 draw?
I want to play queen e7 and try to trade queen.
And then
Rook e7 versus
and then queen takes.
So Luke's saying the point is after queen f7 here, it's still going to be a draw.
Yeah.
Because you block the
Because the rook can come back, it's going to be defended. Now, white doesn't have to necessarily take it, you can keep trying to play around, but black has this secure enough here that there's not going to be any breakthrough for white. You could play maybe knight e8 as well if you want to trade that way. Just depends how you want to trade here. But queen's also threatening to come into h5, so if you move the knight, then black gets perpetual.
Yeah, that was
Because he can always check on this diagonal here. So now it's black who has the perpetual ideas if the knight ever moves. So queen f7 would have been the draw. Like we mentioned, queen e7 was the blunder, and then
Yeah, queen b8. Queen f7 stops queen b8 on accident with like what, rook g8.
yeah, because rook g8.
You lose
So
the exchange.
after queen f7 rather, rook queen d8, and you just exchange on g8.
And then
Yeah.
black went to pawn.
Yeah, you just exchange everything.
Yeah, that was what I was kind of.
I take.
I didn't think I could move here.
Takes
Yeah, but then
and
queen e5.
Then queen takes b5.
No,
or
you-
just perpetual.
No, you take on g8
I
with the
think
queen.
perpetual is
Well,
best
no,
because you have the
Yeah.
pawn
I feel
structure
like
and
if you take
the
on
end.
G8,
wait,
like
Yeah, this anyways.
What?
I'm always banking on this.
Yeah, that sort of stuff.
taking on G8.
I still thought queen e7 was a draw,
Spawns
obviously
on
missing
the,
d8, but I thought it has
that?
maybe a
Queen
one
side.
winning chance.
Because after like
Yes.
queen captures,
Um,
capture.
Okay, so wait. Queen takes g8.
Queen takes
I don't
g8's a
know.
little
I think-
awkward because
yeah,
white
queen
can fight
captures
on by
g5.
taking here.
Okay.
So what's the correct move in this position?
Perpet.
Queen h5. The computer says you can also play king g7, which makes sense because the knight is trapped.
Play.
But then we can take the
And you're keeping the perpetual.
I was thinking that move.
But it's drawn because of the perpetual ideas.
Thank you.
So the whole point there is, right, we're keeping those active ideas. So this one was, that wasn't a blitz game, it wasn't a full-blown control classical, but we're keeping active ideas. We're looking for ways to try to keep going.
Whose username is that?
I don't know, but he's at 2200, so. This was a game from one of the online tournaments, the US Chess online tournaments. I don't remember if it was like a Wednesday or a Friday or
It's
whatever
probably like
day
some
it was.
8-year-old Canada master.
Yeah, some 8-year-old guy who's 2260 and was beating the socks off of me.
He knows, he
I
knows
mean-
15 moves of opening theory, but puts all the numbers in his name so he remembers them.
But if we look at this position and think about it for a minute, you see that white is getting crushed.
Yes.
I mean, the D file looks terrible.
He's a prestige
Oh,
check.
yeah.
The A4 pawn is weak. You're down in exchange. You've got a little bit of play on the B file. That's about the only thing you can dream of, right? Say, okay, I've got the B file. Yay, go B file.
Yeah, but
Other than that, it's just looking terrible. The king's on the center side of things, and nothing looks good. So this is another one of those that I was very, very close to resigning. In fact, in this game, I was always one move away from resigning. It was like, if my opponent makes the right move, I'm going to resign, because I don't see a good way to play. But he kept not making the right move. And it kept letting me say, well, there's one more idea. There's one more idea to try, and then if he doesn't make the right move, I have another idea. And that's kind of what we see. So, back to that question that I've been asked a couple times now, when should you resign? My practice is when you run out of ideas. And here I have sort of one little cheeky idea to try to unravel this. I don't like this D file at all. I'm getting destroyed on the D file and not going to be happy there whatsoever. So I come up with kind of a cheeky little idea here. How can you close the D file? Is there a way to do that?
every way just looks like it loses
Wow.
material.
Why gotta find the tech
D4.
D4.
Oh, you just don't take
D4.
And the point is, if he takes, which is what happens in the game, and it is objectively still the best move, because you're winning the pawn. But now after king d2, the d file's closed, right?
Okay.
So I'm still down in exchange, and white has a protected passed pawn. This doesn't look good. I'm not saying that white is now back to being better, but at least you're not getting mated on the d file. So you survived one problem. Right? Yes.
The whole stacking up pawn just to block some line is useful even if you're not trying to swindle someone.
Yes, even if it's not a swindle, this is a very common positional idea. So that idea of giving up the pawn and sacrificing it in order to block opponent's pieces. This happens in a lot of like isolated pawn type positions where, you know, everybody's fighting for a square maybe in front of the pawn. Sometimes if you can get that push in, the other guy takes with a pawn, and now all of his pieces are stuck behind his own pawn. He can't break through there. Yes?
Would it be better to have C takes D4 instead of E takes D?
The thing with C takes D is that I start to get some counterplay a little this way maybe. I'm trying to remember what's
Maybe
going
now.
on.
Well, I mean, you just keep it closed anyways. Or you can't really choose.
I mean, this lets him open it up.
Yeah, CD is much better.
It's more just a shot, right? You're playing that long shot idea. You're saying, I'm going to see if he takes en
Is
passant.
that a better idea?
You're gonna see if he
For
takes-
black, if I'm black, I like this more.
What am I doing?
I want to keep things open. If I'm black, I probably play CD rather than E takes D3.
Especially
It's more just an enticing idea. You're saying, I'm going to give you one idea. In fact, I think this was one of those, like I said, I was always one move away from resigning. I was like, if he plays CD, I'd probably just quit. I probably just resign after C takes D because the D file's opening up and I'm getting mated or losing too much material.
you just couldn't resist en
Just
passant.
He just couldn't resist. I mean, it's a free pawn, and the computer evaluation does say it's the better move. There's a part of me that thinks maybe this guy was occasionally using a computer with the way some of his moves were. Obviously not all the time because he ended up losing this game, but he made some moves that just like didn't make sense as strong as he is. Like, you know, they don't follow the logical flow. So anyway, E takes D3, King D2, and then Queen takes A4, and then White's not out of the woods, right? We're still very close to being busted. Black has the protected passed pawn, and now passed A pawn as well. And really, this queen is starting to create a lot of threats here. My next move was another one that I played very unwillingly. And again, I almost resigned before this move because one thing I don't want to do is trade queens, right?
Yeah.
Losing material, you don't want to give up queens. But if black takes the C4 pawn, you're pretty much toast as well.
Yeah.
So queen b3 is basically forced. And after the queen trade, our active ideas are running low. Now, the good side for white. We've got 3 attackers on the d-pawn, so we're going to be able to get that back. Maybe not immediately, but we can get it back. If we trade down into a king and pawn endgame right away, of course we lose. So if he plays like rook d6 and we trade all the pieces, we're going to lose that king and pawn endgame. Because he's got the outside passer on the a file.
This feels like just a resignable position as white.
It's close to it, you're still losing. But the thing is, it's a little bit difficult for black. And here's why. The d-pawn's blockaded, right? Black can't force that d-pawn through. The only way he can ever do that is if he gets a rook to the side of the king to give check. Otherwise, you can't force the king away. This a-pawn wants to run up the board, but the a-pawn can be easily blockaded by my rook. I can bring it to a3, right? So if imagine a position with like the pawn on a4, the rook on a3, and maybe I could somehow maneuver my knight to b5. Like if I could play knight a2 to c3 to b5. And then where's the breakthrough for black? It becomes really difficult to get into the position. White's starting to hold the squares. He's going to be tied to defending this a-pawn if he pushes it. Of course he's got to do something on this side. I'm not saying there's not a way to do it, but black still has to prove that he's going to make a breakthrough. And he's got to show the ideas. They're there. I'm not saying they're not there. I'm not saying white is drawn at this point. But make your opponent prove it. Make your opponent show his endgame technique. Yes?
I think what black's going to do here is go for the h5, rook h6 and g5.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you could play rook h6 and g5. That would definitely be one way to try to open things up.
What about f4?
You could also prepare ideas of b5. You could set up a push there with things like king c7 and rook coming over. There's lots of ideas here for black.
Does f4 work or not?
F4 works as well. F4, I think, is the best move in the position. The idea behind F4 is quite simply, if you take here, then rook e4, and something's going to be falling here. Because if you take on c4, these are going to be too strong to stop. And if you defend it with like rook c3, then after this takes, these are forwards as well. Too many weak points.
Yeah, white.
So F4 here is completely winning. Again, it's one of those positions where it's like, if black finds the right move, I can resign. If black plays the right thing, I can resign. But he keeps not playing the right thing.
Probably because he doesn't want you to resign.
So he plays F4, which is the right move. But he doesn't follow it up correctly. So he takes F4, and again, if he plays rook e4, I probably throw in the towel. I've got too many weak points. But he plays rook d6.
What?
What Oh, why does he do that?
It's really not. And this was why I had some concerns about him like occasionally checking a computer. Because I was like, F4 is the right move. It's the computer move. And from a human perspective, it makes sense if you know the follow-up. But if you don't play the follow-up, then why are you playing F4?
I know!
We're still threatening rook e4.
Yeah, but
You're still
I
threatening
know
rook
when you're
e4.
playing on
But the point,
But you had it a move earlier.
I do that sometimes.
the point is that now, after g3, everything's secure.
White needs
Why can't you just
It's
take
not
that
a fork. So that's what happens. Eventually, the rook comes down to d4, but I can defend the c4 pawn. The point was I couldn't defend both at once. So after king c7, I actually do make a tactical mistake here. I want to go ahead and take with the knight.
Oh, man.
And again,
Come on.
I'm not sure this king and pawn ending is losing necessarily yet.
Well,
But there is a better winning move for black. Tactically winning. Win a piece.
Peace.
Here,
Oh.
let me
B5?
solve it.
b5.
B5. Yeah.
If you take with the pawn, then c4.
Oh, C4.
And if you take with the rook, then the knight is hanging.
I'm just gonna
And if you do nothing, then he just takes your pawn on c4, and you have the same
And you're
problem.
pretty
So
much
like
dead.
rook
But they
here.
didn't play.
Yeah, take
Same
it,
issues.
just deflect it.
So again, one move away from resigning, right?
So they didn't.
I didn't
play.
see this idea either. To be fair, both of us overlooked this b5 idea. That's pretty human to overlook when it's defended twice by the opponent.
Yeah.
I'll
It's a
overrule
completely
check.
human over.
But it is a nice
I can
tactic.
see it.
Good thing to
Make
good thing to know.
If I lose that, I won't.
Instead, we had rook d4,
Hey, you played the right move, just one move too late.
and
Two moves.
Yeah, 2 moves late.
Two.
I played rook c3, and once again, the same tactic is here. You could play b5 again, and c4 still works. But it doesn't happen. He plays a4. And now
That's all I wonder.
we're starting to get closer to having some glimmers of hope, right? I mean, yes, the a pawn is coming, but now it's not defended anymore, right? So now, suddenly black has gone from just being up a couple pawns and an exchange to really only having this outside passer that's no longer protected. And I have a majority on the queen side if I can manage to deal with one more problem. So we're just going one step at a time. I mean, like I said, this is a game that was not good for white. Always one move away from resigning, but black just keeps making not the best move. Not the best move here and there. Yes.
I have a feeling I know what your plan is. I mean, your one weakness is knight.
Just king c2 and
So we gotta get the king out of the pin
I don't
first
like
of
going that
all.
way. I like the 4 to 2.
I want king to e3.
yeah. Nice.
Bring the king over to the queen side so it can help out with that. Of course, you still gotta defend the knight right now. But the point is, he's not actually threatening a3 right now. I mean, a4 was definitely premature in my opinion because there's not even a threat to it. You can't play a3 right now, I just take it. I mean, I guess if your idea is to sack it to take the c pawn, but that might have been his initial thought was, okay, I'm gonna take that and then take on c4 and then have the connected passers.
Yeah, but then you'll drop black drops another pawn because of
White
the-
drop
Yeah.
Yeah, you drop another pawn because of the skewers back here. So I think in the game, that was what he thought. He was like, I'm gonna play a3 and then I'm gonna take on c4. And then he was like, but I don't wanna allow the back rank stuff, so I'm not gonna do that. But he had already played a4, so he'd weakened himself a little bit by the time he saw it. So he played king b7 to stop that. He's like, now I'll play a3 next, right? Knight e5.
Would it have been best to trade down into a king pawn ending?
Perhaps.
Not inherently, no. So we both did have to calculate that, and that is a good question. If everything trades, you have to be able to evaluate that king and pawn.
Yeah, you might be able to because of something like h5.
Like the white king is close.
H5 still doesn't work because you have f3 and g4.
No pawns are useless.
So you can always mobilize your queen side as white.
Dominant.
Black can get these things going over here, but you're both going to have pass pawns. Black's going to be tied down to defending yours, you're going to be tied down to defending his. It should be a draw. You can both create passers and stop each other from making a breakthrough. If Black's king runs over here to win your pawns, then you can win his, and you get that. The reason you can get it is because this one is backwards, he doesn't have the connected passers. If he had the connected ones, it would be better for Black.
Well,
Because they can support each other, the king and pawn ending.
Well, the thing is, in some king and pawn endings, they can. Like if you move to attack one, then the other one moves up, and you can't take the other pawn.
If they're connected, they always support each other. You can never attack the back. You can never take the back one. The other guy goes and queens.
Well, you often have the same idea in this thing, where you have two disconnected pawns separated by one file.
The problem is you have to take my pawn back.
Right, right.
And you can't take my pawn back with the king and have your king over here.
And you can't
Yeah.
bring your king to c6.
So if you bring your king over here to do that with the pawn, then I push my stuff. And if you bring your king over here, then if you push this pawn, I get a passer over here.
Okay,
So that's the reason why you can't.
got it.
Yeah. Good thinking though, because one row apart, they can support each other. It just doesn't quite work here. You have to get the break in first. If you could trade both of these guys off the board now, then do the trades, then probably Black would be winning the king and pawn. Slight differences, right? So king b7 and knight e5, and the whole point now is, well, we're defending c4, right? Our knight's no longer under attack, our king can move, our rook can move away from the knight, and c4 is now defended. So really now suddenly the evaluation is starting to change a little bit. This is the point of the game where now Black's going to have to actually think to make sure he doesn't lose the game at this point. Make sure he doesn't give away things too much.
Which he does give away something.
He does give things away. So rook d1, he tries to come in on the back side. Rook comes to a3, and the other rook goes to a8. So now suddenly these rooks that were really active and dominating the d file just a couple moves ago, pinning down my knight, One of them's back to being passive.
Yeah.
The other guy's kind of active, but he's not doing much right now. He doesn't really have any real threats. Doesn't have anything to threaten. And definitely, at this point, I'm a lot happier than I was 5 moves ago.
Mhm.
I mean, at this point, I'm happy to be playing the game, whereas 5 moves ago, like we said, we were 1 move away from resigning. So just coming up with ideas, keeping looking for the next thing is going to be the key in those positions where we're not happy with what's going on. So I decided to get active, King E4, because I say, you know what, if you're going to play this way, then I'm going to play for a win. Rook goes to B1, F3, starting to mobilize and just making sure there's not a weakness on the second rank. And Rook B3. So this is Black's idea. The question is, does it work? And this is what you have to kind of see in order to be able to play F3 on the last move as well. But does this idea work for Black, this Rook B3 idea?
Well, you can play Rook A1, can he?
I mean, take, King, G3, I mean.
A1 or Rook A2?
Well, should you keep the Rook on the board for white, or should you trade it?
We shouldn't trade.
We should not trade.
No trading.
Trading losing.
Trading is just.
Why is trading
I'm
losing?
just trading.
Because after rook takes,
Is it?
pawn takes,
Trading
and
is.
then
What
after
happened?
93,
Why knight D3?
wait, what?
To
Oh, you
stop
played Kimo.
B2.
King can walk back.
Oh, I
King
hate you
G3,
that.
Rook A2.
Yeah, so this is what we have. Rook takes, pawn takes, and then king back to D3. And the point is now the king is going to come attack the pawn, and you've got to figure out a way to defend it with the rook, because if you put it on that A3 square, you can attack it and I can win the pawn. The king can just come over and gobble it up.
That's nice how the knight defends C4 and F3.
Yeah,
Oh,
so this
yeah.
is the whole idea, is that white is trying to set up a fortress. This is what allows white to play for the win, is that this knight on E5 holds C4, it holds F3. So if I could get this same structure I just had, just 1 square forward with my pawns, then there's no longer weaknesses for black to attack.
His knight is very.
You don't really want to push this pawn, you just want to keep where it is because it's defending the knight. But you're just keeping everything secure, making sure there's not weaknesses to attack. And you'll kind of see that as this goes on. So he plays the rook to A4, king comes to B3,
Is he gonna play Rook B4?
and I think originally he thought, yeah, rook to B4 looks better. The problem is it doesn't really work, because you can play like knight D3
Yeah.
and attack it and you're holding the square.
I think also you can just keep it there as a rook. What's the rook doing on B4?
I mean, your threat is B2, so you have to either play king B2 or knight D3. You can't let him play B2.
Wait a minute. Wait. After rook b4, knight to d2,
Knight D3?
and knight to d3, b2. We just have to take the knight, right?
Yeah, just knight takes pawn.
Left was my pawn.
Yeah,
And your rook is.
Oh yeah, your rook's
Trapped.
trapped.
I can just play my pawns. I mean, you probably play C6 and then D5. You'll get it out eventually, but you're going to have to take time to deal with that problem.
Precious time.
And we could, in fact, actually.
So, black decides to go rook A3 instead.
Nope.
Because he figures I at least don't want my rook to be entombed on that B4 square.
There goes his pawn.
But of course, that's going to lose the pawn.
He could play Rook A2.
Or maybe the
His
computer.
point is to get the rook back around. But like we said before, we're already setting up that fortress on the queen side, so we don't have to worry about this. Because all of these threats, we can just push.
H5.
And now we've got that structure, our knight defends here, the pawn defends the knight, and there's no more weaknesses.
When you have the crease to get in, you have the E4 square.
At this point, white is definitely better. We'll kind of go through the rest of the game quickly because it doesn't have to do with our topic anymore at this point.
What's
This
up,
is
you
winning.
win this game?
You can even
Yes. At this point, white is better. I don't know if it's won for sure just yet. I think a couple more moves it gets there once white activates the king. If black plays actively, he can still hold, but it's very tough. So, for example, I'm going to bring my king to the king side, and he really needs to get activated with this stuff over here and create counterplay if he wants to get anything going. If he just stays passive, I'm going to win with the majority, and that's kind of what happens. Because now once the king gets here,
That
this is
knight
all
is-
falling, this is too close to
That
being-
knight is an amazing knight.
the knight is a dream.
It's like spending everything. It's like, oh yeah, but look at this.
And remember where we started? That knight was on C1
Oh,
and
and
trapped
what?
in the worst piece in the history of chess.
He thought in the bathroom crying.
So anyway, a few more trades, and at any point in here he could have resigned, but he played all the way until we got to basically queening, and this was where black was out.
93 versus Rook reminds me of a game you played yesterday.
So once again, when we're talking about those swindles, if we go back to where we were before, and that was the big question you guys had before, when should we resign, right? As long as we can keep finding one idea, as long as our opponent has to find one more move before we lose all of our hope, make them play one more move. Right? Make them play the one more move that lets you lose all hope. So in this game, there were a lot of one more moves, and we should have resigned for white, but he kept not playing them. He kept doing things a little bit off, so he just kept grinding, and eventually things came back around. Yeah.
And then, especially if your opponent is on the lower end of the rating range, so like anything under master, even after that, I would say don't resign until it's like really, really clear you're gonna lose. Because
Just like, you're gonna lose, Marika, you're dead.
Speaking from experience, I have taken some really awful positions, and just based on my opponent messing up, I was able to draw or win.
Yeah,
So-
it happens a lot. And even this game, I mean, this game we saw how bad it was again and again. And this guy's 2260. And we weren't playing at 1200. This is a strong guy. He knows what's going on. He's
And maybe
master
it's
level
just the kid
strength.
who's using the computer half the time.
Well, then you're playing the computer after that. You're still doing okay. Yeah.
Okay, you want to do that.
And I will say this, and probably my craziest experience, I beat an 1850 down like a piece and a couple pawns.
Oh yeah,
I had
I played
no
this
plan.
one tournament once. When I was younger, I played this one tournament once. 3 of the games I lost to queen. One of the games my opponent like moved here, and I'm like, okay.
It happens.
That was 800.
It was an 1850, you came to Jack's once. I think you probably remember.
Oh yeah.
Are they or no?
From Orlando?
Yeah, I was this close to beating
Yeah,
him.
you almost beat him too. And I was down so much, and I just played purely for tricks. Like, okay, if he doesn't fall for this, I'm gonna resign. And I sacked like all my pieces and made him with my queen and knight. And those were my only 2 pieces left.
Sometimes it works. I mean, that's the thing. As long as you keep having one more trick in your bag. Now, in actual chess games, I'm not advocating just being tricky all the time. I'm not saying that in the equal positions you should be that way. But we're talking about when we're down, right? So here's another game where things aren't going to look too good for white very soon. This is another game against a national master, against Mike Saylor. And here I played queen a5, trying to be active and cheeky and fun, and just forgetting that the e3 pawn is hanging.
My God, I'm gonna be queen here. Oh.
Alright, so bishop takes e3, and life looks pretty bad.
Yeah.
And you're basically, no, you're dead. You're dead already.
But once again, you at
That's
least
calm.
want to find active ideas. I mean, I've got some pieces on the queen side. I'd love to be able to make some takes over here, but the bishop is defending, of course. I'd love to make some dreams of some sort of attack going on, but it's just not happening just yet. There's not enough working here. We're going to have to hope for a mistake and pose some problems to see if our opponent does anything wrong. So I played the move bishop to a3, with the idea of course, putting it on this d6 square, cutting off the d file, and creating some nasty threats on c7, right? Because that looks
Wait,
fun.
you actually might have like something like bishop takes c6 next with like a voted space sort of thing?
Yeah, there's lots of fun sacrificing ideas here. Maybe getting the bishop on d6 and sacking and playing queen a6.
Well, you can do it without
Or
playing.
maybe play the
Yeah,
bishop to
king.
d6 and then put the queen on c7 and mate him and be pretty
No,
stupid.
you're right. He does, yeah. Well, what
But-
happens if he doesn't take back?
The point here is it's black's move. It's not our move right now.
Yes.
So those ideas are all in the air. We're trying to create them. Bishop a3 is creating the threats. We want to pose problems to our opponent. So he is looking at that. He's thinking about that. But black can take the initiative, and he does that here very nicely. See if you can see the move that my opponent plays. What's a move that's forcing that basically keeps the attack for black?
Well, I haven't analyzed thoroughly. I was just looking at knight takes e5 because you got some queen fork stuff going on.
Running bishop d2.
So knight takes e5 is an interesting idea. There's a way to set it up to make it more powerful.
Forcing checks and giving checks and bishop. The only thing I see that looks tacky is bishop d2 because there's like knight reveal.
And that's what happens in the game, bishop d2. And the point is, if the king takes, then of course you have that knight e5 check idea. And now you're doing it with check, and the bishop is falling as well. And if the queen takes, then my active play is slowing back down, and you still have the knight takes e5 idea because you're discovering onto the queen now.
Well,
It also-
but aren't you up a bishop now? And
Not
your
really.
king's
No, but
pretty
then the
safe.
knight's gonna take the attack of the bishop.
It's a temporary sacrifice. White has extra pawns here, and there's threats of things like c3, and all of these holes in the position with the attack, and your piece is stuck over here on the queen side, not being able to defend. It is a piece sacrifice, but it's a very dangerous one. So that is something to keep in mind as white. We're going to be up a piece if we can find a way out of the madness, but at the same time, black has a very nice attack going. So we've got to be really sharp. This makes the game a very sharp game. So I decided to go into the madness here with king
King
takes.
takes. Oh, that's.
Get that king in.
Get the king. Put the king on d6 and checkmate on c7.
My reasoning is a couple things. I mean, if you take with the queen, once this file opens up after something like knight takes, your king is stuck in the center permanent.
It is.
Because the rook's always going to be cutting off the d file, and the queen's always threatening to come from this side, and f3 is always under attack. There's bishop g4 ideas, there's the bishop going the other way ideas, and your king's stuck, which means this h1 rook can never come help. So I just don't like this at all for white. I think it's easy for black to find moves to keep improving the position and continuing the attack. There's not easy for white to be active. After king takes, you have some ideas of running over this way. And then at least your queenside pieces can help you in the defense, and at least you have both rooks to be able to maybe swing over. So it gives you more defensive resources. Of course, it looks very scary. It's a scary move to play, right? King takes d2, just walking right into the discovery, saying, all right, I took the bishop, and now prove your attack to me. And sometimes this is an important thing to do in chess as well. If your opponent plays a sacrifice, in this case it was sound and things get a little iffy later, but if your opponent plays a sacrifice, always make sure you're calculating it as well. Don't just trust what your opponent thinks, because they're not always right.
Yeah.
Think through it all the way yourself. Just because somebody's higher rated than you, or even if they're not, just because they play something that looks scary, make sure you do the deep think. Because sometimes you just have to rise and meet the challenge. So knight takes e5. And now is another one of those moments where I made a practical decision as opposed to the best decision. The best move here is king to c3.
How do we just that?
And the point is, after knight takes f3, it's just bad for white. I mean, black got his bishop back, is having all the fun, he's getting ready to come into the game on d3. And I just really didn't like this for white at all. I no longer have these bishop d6 ideas because this pawn is gone. So there's none of that fun anymore.
I think the king's actually safer on b4 than it is on any other square on the board.
Yeah, it might be safer on b4 than anywhere else, and that's not somewhere I really want to be.
Yeah, if b4 is your safest square.
So c3 is objectively the computer best evaluation, but practically, again, it's going to be pretty easy for black to find the moves. I played a move that set a little bit of a trap. And I won't say a trap in that, oh, he's going to fall for this dangerous trap, but it's a trap in that it entices him into somewhere where he shouldn't go. So I played the move king c1.
Okay. I don't see anything.
And the point of king c1
Good morning.
is black has two options. He has to choose between taking the bishop and knight d3 check.
Wait, that's a free bishop. Oh, wait,
That's
I'm
a
sorry.
free-
What?
It's a free bishop, but he sacrificed a bishop already.
Well, why did you oh.
So he has to choose between knight d3 and knight takes f3.
Should take knight takes f3, shouldn't he?
I don't know. I mean, if you play knight c3, where do I go? I have to either come to c2 or b1, or d2 or d1, and no matter what, he has discovery ideas.
Where
Could
does
you
the
do a
ideas
b2?
go?
I don't
Oh,
know.
no.
That's what you have to calculate.
I think he plays two.
What's up? Huh?
So the question is, does black have a winning, if black plays knight d3, does he have a way to win?
I mean, I think if you move on the D file, yeah, he's wasting.
Yes.
But I think if you play C2 or B1,
No, it's the same.
although probably B1 because knight B4 wouldn't be a double check. Maybe.
No, I think white's weird.
I think you have to give up a rook.
Well, you could discover, yeah.
But I
Well,
think
problem is
if,
that gives us an exchange.
if black goes and gobbles up your pieces, I think white has some attack with the queen and the knight.
Yeah.
Yeah, you may just.
It does get a little worrisome after like the queen A.
And this was one of those where my opponent decided to enter the complications. And I don't blame him, because the other thing is, after knight takes f3, it's easy to be concerned about like queen takes
Yeah.
a7.
Yeah.
Right? It looks like white's starting to get some counterplay.
Not enough counterplay, but just
It's not going to be enough, but it does look threatening. I mean, this knight's getting ready to come into the game. The bishop is cutting off some squares. Knight b6 is pretty dangerous because it's going to stop your king from being able to get out, because all these squares over here are going to be covered suddenly.
What about like the queen g2 next now for black? And now black's like, hey, I'm gonna make you.
Yeah, there's definitely good ideas. This is what black should have gone for. This is the better way, but it can be scarier. Because when you have the initiative and you're attacking, you sacrificed a piece for the attack, you've got the tempo, and you have a way to play check and keep the tempo. A lot of times you want to keep doing that. You want to keep attacking, right? You don't want to stop, cash in your pieces too early, and then give the other guy a chance.
that's what
And
I
so the
usually
whole idea from a practical perspective of king c1 is that knight d3 is very enticing. It says, I just want to see if you're going to fall for this idea, because I don't believe you have a good follow-up.
And also, you only have like 5 minutes on the clock, so good luck.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a little more time than that, but knight d3 is what happened, and then king to b1. Which again looks weird, but like Luke mentioned before, if we put our king on c2, there's double check, which is of course worse than just normal check, and things get a little wonky. So of course my rooks aren't connected, but the truth is there's not any great moves for black to continue the attack. Here, actually, the best thing for black to do is to go back to where he was, or play knight e1. So black's best is just to do the check and then take the bishop and then be back where we would have been if he took the bishop 2 moves ago. There's not a good way to continue this going, as much as we want there to be. Anything else actually suddenly switches things back the other way, because now that black didn't take my f3 bishop, white is up a bishop. So if this attack doesn't work, white will just be up a piece. So once again, we're just asking that question. We're giving one more chance for our opponent to go wrong once we're in that lost position, and we're seeing if they're going to find it. So knight b4 is what my opponent played instead, which is sensible if you want to attack, because I mean you're just covering all these squares. It looks nice. Maybe you'll even dream of playing c3 or taking. But this bishop is suddenly doing a really good defensive job of keeping the queen out of g2. If you had that bishop off the board, queen g2 kind of ruins my day all day long. That's why it's so important for him to have taken that instead of going for this. King b2, getting out of the check, of course. Knight comes back to d3, and now king to c3.
Okay, king's back at c3.
Stops the knight check.
The difference is there's no rook d3.
The difference is he can't take my bishop on this move either.
Yeah.
Because before, if I played king c3, he just plays knight takes bishop, and now
But now
the bishop's happy with it. And suddenly this knight on d3, kind of like in the last game, remember where our opponent played e takes d3 and the e pawn was in the way? Now the knight's kind of in the way. I mean, you'd rather have the rook there. You'd rather be playing rook takes d3.
rook
You
there.
crash
Yeah,
it
that's what
through.
I'm saying.
So it's like the knight needs to move away to put another piece on the square that it's on. Even though it's pretty, it's not attacking anything anymore.
So then like knight c f2.
So knight f2, that's what happens, opening up the square for it. And now the counterplay starts. Queen takes a7.
See, they
So creating threats here and
so
attacking
much
the knight.
money.
Rook comes to d3. And where should we bring the king?
Oh,
I don't know,
Yeah,
B4,
I'm scared, but I want to say B4.
B4, yeah, B4.
Oh, we gotta choose one or the other.
well,
B4, not
B4
B.
blocks
Yeah,
the
B4. B2 is just.
Yeah, I like B.
Yeah, but what about King?
B4 is better. Yeah, B4.
B4.
B4. If you put your king on the second rank, someone's about to
I
get
think B4 is
liberated.
better.
C4.
Capture the
yeah.
pawn.
Take the pawn on c4?
Wait, what? What? Wait,
That's what he
what?
said.
Wait,
I don't know about
What
B
is
takes
that?
C4.
B5 check.
Oh, yeah.
King
I don't
C5, King B6. Yes.
I think he can fork you there.
And you just found
Yeah, then you play king
King
c5.
C6.
Someone's about to get liberated. Also, some knight is about to. Wait.
Well, it looks
King
like
has
we
to
might
go
have
back.
rook c3 check.
No, no, no.
I think he takes you first.
Well, no. What if we do?
Well, then you
What,
play king B6.
what if we do king to B4?
Well, then the king is probably.
King
Go
I
back.
don't know. Lots of crazy ideas in there.
King
King
hunt.
to B4 is the best idea.
Anyway, I play king b4. King c4, you can maybe play two, but why calculate the fork if you don't really want to or have to? The point is king b4, it does block your bishop, it looks awkward, but black no longer has a way to take advantage of it. There's no longer any good checks. He's on all the light squares, but he doesn't have the dark squared bishop, so there's no more fun on the diagonals.
He just doesn't have enough.
The knight's too
Queen's
far
also
away.
trapped.
You need 3 to mate, I'm pretty sure.
And you've got the threats of queen e8 taking the rook and taking the knight on f2.
Yeah.
So he tries to go all out on the attack. Rook takes b3.
Okay.
That'll work.
Okay.
Once you're committed, you're
Wait,
committed.
you're stacking a rook. You should have took him with the pawn there.
Well, again, what have we been talking about, right? The psychology of
Take
swindles.
the pawn with queen e8.
The game has changed. Earlier I was lost, and I was trying to swindle him.
And,
Now it's on the other foot. Now he's losing. He's down a piece, and he's trying to swindle me.
Wait, what?
He's losing in this position, but he has to stay active. He has to come up with a fun way to try to create counterplay and pose problems for me,
What's the time for
or else I'm going to be able to win.
Oh, what's the time?
It was a rapid game, like 15-10 or something like
I
that.
might play rapid game too online later.
Is that rabbit or rapid?
So after rook takes b3, a takes b3 of course, and then the knight comes in with check. And black's just starting to run out of firepower. I mean, he's attacking, but there's just not enough pieces left.
King just has to go up.
His whole point was he's going to lose a rook on the back rank here, or he's going to lose this knight. So he'd rather keep the knight and get the king out of the way and sacrifice this rook. That was kind of his thinking. So king c3, rook comes to d8, and now both the knight and the rook are safe. I can't win either of those, so he gave up the other one instead, and is still trying to attack. Knight to c5,
I wonder what that's
And
doing.
Well, that's our
kind of
thing.
wrap up.
threatening mate, and just threatening to trade down. At this point, if I can trade down, I'll be a happy camper. And it's pretty hard to not trade down, because the only other way to stop mate is rook d7,
And the counter
and
pass.
that just kind of loses a rook. So knight takes, and bishop takes, and now white looks pretty happy.
Yeah, even though the king's just wide open stage here.
You're up the dark square bishop, and the dark squares are very scary for
Man,
black.
those rooks are suddenly kind of good.
Yeah,
They've been
and now those
sitting in
rooks
the game.
are coming to life.
I mean,
They didn't
you're
have to
running.
move to activate.
So rook d3 at least, right? Fork the king, win back the bishop. King takes c4 now.
Yes.
Takes f3.
Happy, happy, happy.
And now the question is, can we find a decisive breakthrough?
You have
Yeah,
four
queen
C.
A8, queen takes B7.
Queen c7, and what now?
I don't know.
This is a fun move.
Ooh, bishop
get-
Can we sack the
b6.
bishop on
Bishop
b6?
B6.
Bishop b6, and if he takes
Bishop's a
queen
B6,
a5.
he said.
It's all like-
Yeah.
Oh yeah, bishop's a B6.
And it's mate in 2 because
Oh,
black only
yeah.
has 2 options. If he
King
takes
D-
the bishop, what do we play?
Queen A5 checkmate.
And if he plays king to d7,
Queen d8.
queen d8.
Queen D8.
Yeehaw.
Oh, you made it him. He didn't even resign.
Yeah, it was played. I think he saw the bishop takes mate, so he just played the other one without, looking to see
Can I
if there was
just
something
consider
else.
us
And then he was like, oh yeah, it is mate.
Can I consider us?
Mike Saylor's an FM, right?
I think
I think I know he's an NM. I don't know if he's an FM or not. I don't know
Who's
his
Mike
speed
Saylor?
stat.
That's pretty good.
But he's a strong Florida master. He plays all the time on these blitz things. So if you play like the online blitz tournaments on Mondays or Wednesdays or
Well, so you
Fridays, you
want
can take
against
a
Mike
crack at them.
Saylor?
Shoot, I
Yeah.
gotta play this man.
They're fun, but I haven't played them on in a couple months. It takes a lot of time. You just have to be. It's like if you don't get in right when it starts, it won't let you join after it starts for the later rounds, which is kind of annoying. So a lot of times it's like, oh yeah, I'll go play in it, and you're like 5 minutes past the starting time. I guess not today.
When is it?
Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. They have a group page on chess.com.
What color?
It's U.S. members only.
US members?
So it's U.S. chess members only.
US Chester. So
They also have a larger club just for US chess members.
They have a larger club that's free, but the members only club posts the rated.
And are these like actually?
You have to be
rated?
in this club
They're
in order to
online
play in the
rated,
rated.
but yes.
It's online rated.
Yeah, but a UCF.
Anywhere that you
Shoot, I need to get him
Yeah.
out online blitz. It's like 1100.
Yeah, they do blitz on Wednesday, rapid on Friday, and more blitz on.
okay, I'll join that club when I come home.
You have to actually give them your USCF when you join. It's not one you can just like click and join. You
Yeah.
click and you've got to like give them some
Yeah,
info
like
and
send a
stuff.
message.
Yeah, they verify that you actually are a US chess member.
It actually carries over your rating over to the USCF page as well.
Yeah.
Under, it says online, and then it carries the rating as well.
Yep, so it is a separate, it's not your over-the-board rating, it is an online rating. And Live Chess has online rated events too, I just usually use chess.com, so I can't really speak to that format as
I
well.
remember before that online blitz, I was like, can I go to the lower section?
But alright, so that's what I've got for you guys today. We looked at a few swindles, talked about when we resign, when we throw in the towel, and how we can keep looking for that one more idea, right?
Just stay close over.
You guys have any more questions for me before we wrap up today?
No.
I still have this other game. I'll probably show you guys another time because I could spend plenty of time going over this year off Kramnik game, so we'll save it for another
Thank
day.
you.
I don't want to go over it in 10 minutes. Won't do it justice.
Bye.
Have a good one, guys.
What game is it?
It's between Kramnik and Shirov from Linares in 1994.
It was the rap. There was
Yeah.
Oh, that's not wrong.
Yeah, Sam Copeland does a video on it as well, if you want to check that out. He has one that's like his top 10 games of the 90s, and I think it's like his number 8 game of the 90s or something. So these are his annotations from that game, from Sam Copeland.
I think I learned the most from watching like master games.
Yeah, he does some good videos on those. So if you want to check that out, otherwise we might talk about it another day.
Or something.
But this was another one that has a good show of some of that swindling. Kramnik is winning the game, and Shirov finds some really exciting ways to pose problems to him, and wins a very nice game. Anything else you guys have for me?
No. It's just black is Alexei Shirov.
I actually,
Yeah, they misspelled his name on this. I copied and pasted it. I'm pretty sure it's an I.
well, you can, I play, game Tuesday night that kind of ties in with this lesson where I like